Welcome to the intergalactic space station known as the We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones After Show. We're still working on the name. After show. I forgot to do that. Because
is
in
it
space,
somewhere in Kree space?
It must be. If in space, when you say after show, it echoes. You know, instead of being the absence of sound, it actually goes after show.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know from every science fiction movie ever that there's actually plenty of sound in space. Yeah. That's why you can hear all the phasers and photon torpedoes. So I think the scientists got it wrong. I think Star Wars
they did. Exactly. But we're not here to talk about Star Wars. We are here to talk about probably more Ms. Marvel than anything. We talked a lot about X-Men and Rogue and Avengers, and to your point, in the comic that we reviewed, Ms. Marvel didn't really have an active role. She was kind of in a coma for most, if not all of it. So I wanted to go through and give some of the history of not only Carol Danvers, but also a little bit of Captain Marvel as well, because it's interesting to note that this journey that Carol Danvers has as a character is also a journey of her following in the footsteps of a character named Captain Marvel, naming herself Ms. Marvel, binary, Warbird, all these things, and then doesn't become Captain Marvel until 2012. Like, you would have thought that she would just call herself Captain Marvel from the get-go, but it took a long time to get there. So
yeah, especially because her powers came from Marvel, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah. So it really would have made sense for her to just take it then.
Exactly. So if we go and, you know, we take our spaceship and we go around the sun and we go back in time to 1939, okay, the first character named Captain Marvel was actually originally published by Fawcett Comics and created by artist C.C. Beck and writer Bill Parker, who first appeared in Whiz Comics #2 in February of 1940, which is now owned by DC Comics that we know as Shazam. So Shazam was actually the first Captain Marvel. But when Fawcett Comics rights to the Captain Marvel name lapsed in 1967 in Marvel Superheroes #12, Stan Lee created and Gene Colan designed Captain Marvel, or Captain Marvel, so that the newly formed Marvel Comics group, because they used to be Atlas Comics, could retain the ownership of the Captain Marvel character name, trademark, and then there's this whole battle back and forth, and we don't need to go into all of that. But that's sort of where this whole Captain Marvel thing came from. And so we have a lot in this era where we're naming things or we're creating certain characters because we want to get there first. Like, we have Spider-Man and he's super popular and we need to create a female version because I want to be the first writer to do that. And, you know, all these kinds of things that we've talked about.
And She-Hulk was another one that we've covered that was the same way.
Yeah. So this was kind of another, okay, so now we have this Marvel guy who is a Kree and an alien, and he is, you know, part of this group in Marvel Superheroes. So then he gets his own title, and then it gets canceled after like about 12 years. I don't know if it ran that whole time, but it was canceled in 79. And so they actually released a graphic novel in 82 called The Death of Captain Marvel. And unlike most comic book deaths, this one actually stuck. Like, they actually killed him for quite a while.
Sorry, go ahead. I wanted to stop you right there because, interestingly, my local comic store owner this is when he began reading comics, was at the death of Captain Marvel. So his Captain Marvel is Marvel, and it was one of the most shocking things he'd ever read in comics. I think he gets radiation poisoning and like dies of cancer. Like, it's something pretty excruciating that they do in that comic book story, and he was hooked. And so that is, to him, like a beloved character because that's what pulled him into comic books for the first time as a kid. So he was very displeased with them gender swapping Marvel and sort of wiping him away from the history of the MCU, because he was like, but I was waiting to see that guy. He's the guy that is the reason I read comics, you know. So just an interesting little side note. It's a secondhand story, but Yeah.
Well, and I remember too when Captain Marvel, the movie, was,
Hmm.
rumored to come out. There were discussions of like, okay, now we know Jude Law is in it. Who's Jude Law going to play? He's probably going to play Marvel.
Right.
And then no, he's playing
Right.
Yon-Rogg. And then for like the whole movie, it isn't until very later in the movie we hear about Marvel even being mentioned.
Hmm.
So, and the character is a she instead of a he in that movie,
Right.
but doesn't really come into the picture until sort of later. And it's very different about how the like inspiration comes and that sort of thing. I
Hmm.
think the elements are there, but it's
Yeah.
definitely a different story, and we cut out a lot of the changes that we're about to talk about that Carol goes through. But again,
Hmm.
how do you make a 2-hour movie about a character that's got like 30 years of history? It's really difficult to condense it all into one movie and satisfy everybody.
Well, yeah, and I think one thing that I'm starting to realize, just again being not exactly an outsider, like I've seen the movie and I've read a few stories that I've borrowed from you, but I don't have
Hmm.
the amount of reading under my belt that you do. One thing I'm starting to understand about Carol Danvers as a comic book character, though, is that she really seems to have had a lot of narrative peaks and valleys, and she's gone through a lot of events. And unlike a lot of comic book characters where they kind of stay the same over a long period of time, it seems like she's one that's really changed a lot. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a good segue into you
Well,
talking about her history, but how do you put all those changes into,
yeah.
a movie adaptation, you
Well,
know?
and those changes made her character better. Whereas, if you think
Mhm.
about like Jessica Drew, so she's very similar in that she was created because we had Spider-Man, so we created Spider-Woman and we threw this character in there.
Right.
But they couldn't figure out exactly what to do with her, and they would retcon her and change her, and I don't think she gained the same popularity that Carol did. And a lot of like Carol's, life-changing events helped move her
Mhm.
into a new phase rather than rewrite history that had happened. So
Right.
I really think that Jessica Drew could have been on par with her if the writers just had known what to do with that character, but
Yeah,
didn't happen that way.
I agree.
So there's actually an amazing Spider-Man story. It's called Who's That Lady? Where an African American woman from Louisiana named Monica Rambeau was granted energy powers by extraterrestrial forces, but they were not the Kree, they were different extraterrestrials. And so
Mhm.
she actually became Captain Marvel months after the death of Marvel. So our first Captain Marvel after Marvel is Monica Rambeau. And they had
Mhm.
her actually as the child character in the movie, whereas they had her, I forgot, Maria, I think. I think her mother's name
Yeah,
was Maria. And that was
Maria
supposed to be
Rambeau.
be Carol's like, childhood friend kind of thing. And then I
Mhm.
guess we don't really talk about that in the movie, but now Carol is in the present time, and so Monica would presumably be grown up, and maybe we'll see more of that in Captain Marvel too. But it's
Yeah,
also interesting.
we got to see her use her powers on WandaVision too, didn't we?
Yeah.
Didn't didn't she
Did
actually like turn into Photon on that
did they
show?
did
I
they
thought
say
she I thought she
if she
did.
was Monica or Maria? Yeah, I think she was Monica on that show.
I,
Well, and
I
then
think she
Multiverse
was
of
Monica.
Madness. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure on WandaVision they actually did show her like energy based powers in that. So
Yeah.
at least my that's my memory of it. So
I think she like
I don't
just
know if
started to get
they
them or something.
yeah,
I
something
think
like
that's what it
that.
was. But
So
it's interesting too because the Captain Marvel movie and the Shazam DC movie actually came out like in the same month in
I
2019.
know it's so crazy.
Like, geez, guys, my movie will be
Their
first, not mine.
legacies have been linked for so long, and the two characters could not be more different. I mean, one is
Yeah,
completely based in like magic and like child wish fulfillment, basically, and the other one is become more of like a feminist icon and is like this, more somebody that's based in science and stuff. So
right.
they're really not similar at all. But man, that legal battle over the name, there was plenty of years prior to the New 52 reboot where they could call him Captain Marvel, but they couldn't name the book Captain Marvel because the name to the comic book title Captain Marvel was at Marvel Comics. So they
Yeah.
still had him, you know, named Captain Marvel, but the name of the book was The Power of Shazam or something like that. And so finally, after they rebooted in 2011, they were just like, let's stop fighting it and just call him Shazam. And actually, recently, I think like last week or maybe the week before, they published a book to sort of like hype up the new Shazam movie. And they refer to what used to be called the Marvel family, they call them the Shazamily, which is very
Wow.
funny. So, yeah,
Shazamily.
I don't know.
Well, and we talked about this, I think, during the Dark Reign review, where him
Mhm.
using like there, if he says Shazam, he will transform. So how does he introduce himself?
Right.
Like, hi, I'm Shazam.
Well,
Oh crap, Shazam.
that's
You
the
know.
problem with it. Yeah, that's the problem with
So
it.
so calling him Captain Marvel at least gives him a reason to say, I'm Captain Marvel, and then nobody has to know about the Shazam
Right.
thing, because that really should be a secret. But everybody knows, hey, if you say Shazam, he'll change into a kid,
Right.
and then you can just swat him like a fly. But you know,
Yeah.
it's funny too, because Marvel Comics was like, well, not only is our character called Captain Marvel, but his actual name is Marvel. So he's Marvel, Captain Marvel, instead
Yes.
of like, because Captain Marvel, Shazam, like what does Captain Marvel have to do with Shazam? Maybe it
Uh,
did back in the 40s when his book came out, because it was a Marvel,
Yeah.
because he's a superhuman, or
Mhm.
the general use of the word. So
Yeah, I think it's just not. I mean, it was such a different time. I mean, we're talking like
yeah.
almost 100 years ago
Oh
now.
my gosh.
But what?
No, it's just like
Oh
almost a
yeah,
hundred
I
years
mean
ago.
it
Oh my
is. It
gosh.
is.
It's
It's
like
yeah.
80,
Yeah, it's
but
been a long
still.
time. Yeah, 80 still.
Well, they very well could have went with, at, I don't know, like Atvel or Atlavel, Captain Atlas, if they had retained that name instead of changing to Marvel Comics. So, I mean, that
Right.
could have been very different, but this is, how it worked out. So yeah, anyway, back to Monica
Or
Rambeau. She
Atla
Atlavel.
hyphen no. No, the rest of the word. Atlas.
Oh, I'm not going to say that. You're not going to get me this time. Yes. So somebody else is using the title of Captain Marvel, and then this is where the Ms. Marvel thing hits, where her memories and her powers are stripped by Rogue, and what we talked about in the episode. Although Professor X eventually helps her to regain her memories, so
Hmm.
she becomes just a kind of a regular person, a non-powered supporting character in Uncanny X-Men, and she used to be a
Oh,
high-profile Avenger. So
wow.
yeah. So in Uncanny X-Men number 158, she's in this like sparring session with the Starjammers, which is another X-Men related group, I think. And I think they're related. Are they related to the Guardians? I'm not sure. But anyway,
They're
so
in space and they're mutants,
yeah.
and that's all I know about. I used to have a trading card with the Starjammers on it, and all I remember that was like there was this big, giant, beefy green guy with claws that kind of looked like Abomination. I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, I really don't know anything about them, but that's actually
Yeah.
in Uncanny X-Men 158 is in the
Oh,
collection. So I got to read that. But basically she's sparring with these guys, and then she learns that her powers aren't completely wiped out. Her physical form is kind of like she's in peak physical shape. So even with her powers
mm,
gone, she's still a very like high profile athlete kind of thing. So she's still able to, contribute to some regard, but she's still not quite that, superhuman level. So
right.
there's this whole mission about the X-Men and them being in the public eye. And so she is part of this mission to infiltrate the Pentagon so they can delete the X-Men from all of the databases and, wipe out their information. So while she's doing this, she comes across a file on Ms. Marvel, aka Carol Danvers, and she deletes that file too. So this is another step in the character saying, okay, this is the life that came before. I'm no longer that character or that person. I am, deleting this history. So, moving her in a different direction. And then
Interesting.
later, she's on another mission. She gets captured by the Brood, who are like your typical insectoid beings that travel through space, and they want to infest host with their spawn, kind of like Alien and that sort of thing. But they subject Carol to this evolutionary experiment to trigger the latent potential of her augmented genes. So Wolverine has to free her, and when he does, she finds out that she's starting to manifest these cosmic abilities, saying that she's physically merged with the fabric of the universe and can harness energies from a white hole to access forms of cosmic energies in the form of light, heat, and radiation. And this is where she gets a major power upgrade, still by Chris Claremont, and gets the title of Binary. And so she kind of is born as this new character with a new look, a new costume, and she leaves Earth to have adventures with the Starjammers out in space. And then
okay.
She really isn't featured in comics in the next like decade after that. So it's kind of funny because in the movie we get like a similar thing where in the Captain Marvel movie she flies off into space and then she's not present for any of the stuff that happens in the rest of the Avengers movies until Nick Fury summons her back. So it's sort of like similar to that, you know, aspect of her history. But
yeah,
she's off with the Starjammers and really is kind of appearing infrequently for a while. And then at the around the same time, so back to Rogue. So Rogue is dealing with this like, you know, Carol persona in her head. And so Carol's figured out her identity. She's now this binary character. And Rogue is struggling with the old like version of Ms. Marvel. And so she goes to seek out Professor Xavier for help because he's good at, you know, rebuilding people who have lost their minds, like quite literally. So she goes to the X Mansion to get his help and is trying to like, hey, you know, I'm really suffering here, and I know that, you know, I've got all this stuff in my past and whatever, but I just give me a chance. Like I need some help. This is like really torturing me. And then of course, who should make a return appearance but Binary now, Carol in this form. And the first thing that she does when she sees Rogue is she punches Rogue so hard that she flies into orbit. Like literally Rogue is just like floating over Earth. Like, what just happened to me? So
wow.
So Binary is definitely much more powerful than whatever Rogue stole from, you know, when she was Ms. Marvel.
Wow.
So Charles actually,
I'm amazed that Rogue can survive that, honestly.
Right?
That's what's most fascinating about that to me.
So Professor X is like, okay, hold on, you know, we need to give Rogue a chance because she's suffering here, she's having these issues, and you know, she, as much as she did this to Carol and hurt her, she is also a victim in her own right. So the X-Men reluctantly allow her to stay because at first they're like, hey, if she's staying, we quit, like we're out of here. And you know, Professor X kind of like gets everybody back together. And then Binary is like, what do you want from me, Charles? Understanding, approval? Like, what do you expect from me here? I'm not going to say this is okay, and I'm not going to, you know, forgive her in any sense, like especially, you know, at this point, because it's still kind of, you know, fresh as to when it happened. So basically this is sort of another story way of saying, you know what, Binary's off doing her own thing, and with Rogue here, Binary wants to have nothing to do with them. And since she teamed up with the X-Men, but she really wasn't like one of them, this is kind of her breaking ties with the X-Men and going back into space and being like, look, you guys can have Rogue. I'm out of here. I'm not going to be involved with this. So Rogue is now in the X Mansion. She's going through like therapy to try to get control of what's going on, but it starts to get really bad to the point where the old Ms. Marvel persona starts taking control of Rogue's body. She actually like goes as far as to style her hair differently, redecorate her room, and she actually dresses in Rogue in the old Ms. Marvel outfit. Like it gets really bad until eventually during a battle, she is dragged through something called the Siege Perilous, which is a magical portal that grants any person who walks through it a new chance at life with a new career, home, and so forth. So this sounds like a great, like, hey, this will be a way to clean up, you know, all of this stuff, right? So there's a lot of stuff that happens here, and it's very convoluted and complicated, as a lot of comic and X-Men things are.
Wait,
but
Chris Claremont doesn't write convoluted stories. What are you talking about?
I think this might have been, this was after that
Oh, this
point.
was
I'm
after
not sure who our
his
writer
era.
was here,
Okay.
but yeah, so this is like the 90s.
I
So
almost wonder if the writer after Claremont decided to jettison the binary character because they were like, I don't want to
I don't
write
want
that
to
character.
deal with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. So we really deal with Rogue's issues, and so after the Siege Perilous things happen, Rogue and Ms. Marvel were actually get like physically split, and that's where you see that picture of Rogue fighting a like green, grotesque looking version of Ms. Marvel. Is it's like this Echo is now given physical form, and it's like
Oh,
deteriorating.
wow.
So they get engaged in a physical battle because there's not enough life energy to sustain both of the personalities. So one of them has to die. Like it's time to put an end to this. So
Jeez.
Rogue wins, but doesn't want to take Carol's life a second time. She's like, I can't do this again. So Carol, again, the echo of Carol uses this hesitation and is like strangling Rogue, but then Magneto steps in and all this X-Men background stuff going on, but Magneto is basically a part of the Siege Perilous thing, and he steps in, he finds a way to pull Rogue out, and the echo of Carol is left to die and is no longer a part of Rogue, so that way she can, be restored to just herself. So
That
yeah,
is crazy. I had no idea that Rogue had that much backstory and continuity pre 90s
she
in
dealt
the
with it for
comics.
a while.
Like
Yeah.
that's insane. I didn't know that it went on that long. I mean, because the annual we read was like 82. So we're
Mhm.
talking like 8 years of comics. Rogue was struggling with like identity issues and all that kind of stuff. And maybe she was evil and maybe she wasn't. No, wow,
Yeah.
that's so crazy. I mean, growing up when we did, my experience is the X-Men animated series where she's already an X-Man and she's already got super strength and can fly. And I guess they did address that at some point, but like I
Mhm.
wasn't aware of it. I just thought, oh, she has those powers, you know.
Yeah. So they actually have like Pyro and Avalanche, and they have, and it's funny because they're voiced by guys who do like goon voice actors. So it's like, oh, Pyro, watch out for this. Oh, there she goes. But
Yeah.
they do address it in a very, condensed version where Rogue is, I think it's like a flashback where she's like, admitting to them, this is what happened in my past where I held
Mm-hmm.
on too long and I, absorbed these powers permanently and I hurt that person. And, it's a very dark part of my past, but I'm not that person anymore, kind of thing. So
Right.
yeah, the animated X-Men show is really good. I kind of want to go back through it again, but it's also very
I do
cheesy.
too.
So
This is like just reading this has kind of made me want to go back and watch that. It's on Disney Plus now, isn't it?
yeah,
So
I wonder how
you
many
can just go
like
back
comics
and
things they got right on that show. It'd be interesting
yeah, I know
to see.
that's always the danger of like watching adaptations before knowing comic stuff is then you go like, wait, well, is it really like that?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I don't know. Um, my friend Daniel is a big fan of it and he reads a lot of X-Men comics. So
Mhm.
I think it's probably pretty on model, but yeah, I don't know.
So I guess we probably should have put the disclaimer out there that, we're really not well read when it comes to X-Men. So anything that we're
Yeah.
talking about here is either based on research or, information or things that we've heard or been told. So if we get anything wrong,
Mhm.
I apologize. It's hard to
Right.
pull all this information together when you weren't, necessarily a part of it. So, but the
Yeah, I
gist
mean,
of what happened is here.
I know a lot about Aquaman and I still got things wrong in our last after show. So
Yeah,
I mean, there's the danger even when you do have a lot, just
true.
because there's so much reading that sometimes the retention isn't a hundred
Yeah.
percent. So
So we apologize, but hopefully you're being
yeah.
entertained, and that's the important part. All right,
Yes.
so if we go to the late 90s in 96,
Mm.
Binary is attacked and drawn to an unstable white hole, and the only way to save her is to have Jean Grey physically sever Binary from the source of her powers to stabilize the white hole disruption, thus taking away her extraordinary ability to channel energy through the fabric of the universe. So Carol is stripped of the binary powers, although she's still able to absorb and redirect energy sources, but she doesn't have that like major power upgrade. So around this time, we have Monica Rambeau, who changes her name from Captain Marvel. So now she's going to relinquish that name. She calls herself Pulsar, and then later she calls herself Photon, and eventually she settles on the name Spectrum. So this would have been the second perfect opportunity to call Carol Captain Marvel, because we've had a Captain Marvel and she's changed her name. Carol actually is an offshoot of the actual, well, I shouldn't say original Captain Marvel, but the original Marvel Comics Captain Marvel. And she's lost the binary powers. So this would be a great time to say, you know what? Okay, I'm not binary anymore. I'll be Captain Marvel. But nope. She calls herself Warbird after the Air Force fighter planes to match her return to Earth. And then she joins the Avengers again. So now she joins the Avengers as Warbird.
Before you go on, I just want to say how delightful it is to watch you scramble to try and explain this convoluted history while also acknowledging that it's not the DC thing, it's the Marvel thing. They're different Captain Marvels. And yeah, I'm just enjoying the ride. So carry on.
No problem. So then we have a new hero who emerges, and his name is Genus Vell, who is the son of the original Captain Marvel. And he would actually have two ongoing series of his own, the second of which lasted from 99 to 2002. And then he gets killed off in 2006. And then in 2006, Carol Danvers gets her own title, Ms. Marvel Volume 2, which runs until 2010. So again, we could have called her Captain Marvel, but we didn't. And so it wasn't until 2012, which actually it was in Secret Avengers number 28. Mar-Vell is resurrected because he's been dead for a long time. He's resurrected by the Kree Empire. And then he gives his life defending the Earth. And so this noble sacrifice that he did after being resurrected was enough to convince Carol Danvers to call herself Captain Marvel. And so she finally called herself that in 2012.
Wait, so Mar-Vell died in like the late 70s, and then he was dead until 2012, and then they brought him back to die again.
Yep.
And
then that was, so it's
Captain
like,
Marvel.
Did they resurrect him just for that like last bit of inspiration for her to take on that moniker? Because she could have done that at any time. But but yeah, I think he probably had like a few cameos here and there, or he was involved in some story or maybe flashbacks or something. So I don't know that he was like just MIA, not seen in any comic in that period, but he definitely didn't have a title series of his own. He wasn't part of any group or anything like that recurring. Like he was, they killed him off and that was it. So I think,
I mean, kind of like, well, this is actually a bad example because they brought that character back eventually, but how, Barry Allen was dead for, I don't know, I mean, probably 30 plus years. In comics continuity, there was no Barry Allen. It was just Wally. He was the Flash, and that was how it was. But then they eventually did, bring him back as things become circular in comics. But I kind of like when they will have a death and stick to it. Occasionally, it's nice to do that, to have some sense of loss and also continue a legacy. I know that legacy is something that DC tends to do more of than Marvel, but I definitely like seeing it at Marvel. It's fun, to see them passing this mantle down. And oddly enough, Monica Rambeau was the character that I originally knew as Captain Marvel, because she was the Avengers teamed up with the Fantastic Four to fight Gladiator, who is an X-Men villain, during the John Byrne run from like the 1980s, which I did not read when it was coming out, but I, later went back and read it. And that was the first Captain Marvel I was aware of. So so she was, the African-American woman with like the energy-based powers. And I just thought, oh, that's Captain Marvel. Okay. I didn't know anybody else had come before. So it's really fascinating to get all of this history, and it really just makes me, in a way, it makes me appreciate what goes into making some of these movies and stuff sometimes when they have so much to
Yeah.
wade through, and they have to like distill it down to, okay, what's the core thing that like matters about this character. So I think with her, it really makes sense to just maybe let's just start with Kelly Sue DeConnick's stuff and kind of move forward from there, because that's a good sort of like hard restart for her character, even though they
Yeah.
never truly reboot things at Marvel. So
Well,
yeah, I don't
we're
know.
in the
It's
in the
it's
go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say it's satisfying to, know all this now. So
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because with Disney, taking on more under their umbrella, there's the possibility that we could have a either Captain Marvel 2 or X-Men crossover
mhm,
or something where we go through this, whole story and add this to the existing Captain Marvel of the MCU,
mhm.
add this whole rogue thing to her history. But the question is, do we really have to do that? Like, you know, can
Yeah.
these characters, when they're in this different media form, can they just be the characters that they are? Because the Captain Marvel
Mhm.
that they have in the MCU is really cool. Like she's a lot like
Yeah.
Binary, where she's got these, crazy powers, and she has her
Mhm.
own struggles in the movie that they give her, establishing her identity separate from the one that the Kree gave her to make her think that she was actually Kree. And, this whole thing
Right.
about Yanrog, where he's like, beat me in a fair fight. Like, come on, I'm so proud of you. Beat me in a fair fight. Yeah, you won't be able to prove yourself. Put the powers, turn off the light show. Let's do this like we used to. And that's the only way that you're going to prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet. And she's like, I have nothing to prove to you. Like, I am who I am, and I enjoy using these powers, and I'm going to shove you into this mountain over here, and it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I have nothing to prove. And I thought that was
Yeah,
so
that's a great
cool
moment.
for her to just be like, I am who I am, and you have no
Yeah.
say in that.
Right.
So they did a good job, I think, with that, without having to go through the whole rogue thing. So I don't think that they have
Mhm.
to do that. I mean, it
Mhm.
would be cool to see a live action adaptation of it, but again, are we taking the Captain Marvel that we've established in the MCU now and shoehorning in this comic
Right.
story because we feel like we have to, or does it make sense for the character?
Right.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think with media adaptations, that's really always the thing that I would want to look for is, does it make sense within the
Mm,
narrative that we've constructed? Like the Hawkeye show, I think is a really great example of them pulling in MCU specific elements like his family
hmm.
and the loss of his hearing that he suffered during all the Avengers battles and stuff like that. That had been established in previous movies. That wasn't part of comic continuity necessarily. But then they brought that into the Hawkeye story that Matt Fraction wrote.
Yeah.
And I think that worked really well because they did enough to actually adapt it to fit within their established universe. So if they can justify bringing Rogue in a way that feels organic, that's fine. And in
Hmm.
fact, that's really one of the strengths of what Claremont wrote in the Avengers annual, is that I really felt like it didn't feel like Avengers were just tacked on to X-Men or X-Men were just tacked on to Avengers. It really felt like they were all justified in being in this story. So
Yeah.
yeah, if they can do it in a way that doesn't feel forced, I would be fine with it. But otherwise, I don't think that Carol alone as a character necessarily needs that. So
Well, and we've
yeah.
seen it the other way many times, where a character becomes popular in the media version, and maybe it's a character that they
Mm-hmm.
created just for the Arrow show. I mean, the media version, and they shoehorn that character into the comics, and we're just like, who is this
Yeah.
character? Why do we care? Oh, because they were popular on a TV show, they have to be in the comic now. So that definitely happens, that direction too.
It worked just fine with John Diggle, and it didn't work just fine with Felicity. I can say so.
Yeah.
They had Andrew Kreisberg come in and write one arc of Green Arrow where he forced Felicity into the supporting cast, and the next writer immediately jettisoned that character, and we never heard from her again. So, but John Diggle they added into the comics, and he's still like part of Team Arrow. So there you go. You never
Sometimes it
know.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that
All right.
was all the topics I had for this after show. Is there anything else that you would to discuss or go through?
No, I think that's simply marvelous for today.
Marvelous it is. All All right, well, we hope you have enjoyed this after show. Make sure you check out all of our episodes and all of our after shows on YouTube and Anchor and all of those fun things, because we do this for fun and we hope that you enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody stay safe and keep on reading comics.
And we'll get you later. Marvelous. Marvelous.